Thank you for joining today. My name is Ron Bro. I'll be your presenter today. Our exciting topic will be around subcontractor managers, some tips and tricks we've learned over the years working with various customers, as well as within TopStep. So a couple of agenda items we're going to talk about. We'll talk about resourcing around contractors and subcontractors and what we've seen, as well as potentially if you're using any of the profiles, how to manage those and benefit from those. What we've seen different customers do to capture time and to report on cost at a contractor level. If you do have contractors in your open air environment, it's important to understand what information you want to share with them. So they'll have a couple of do's and don'ts there. And then reports. What are some of the key reports we see customers benefiting from when they do some analysis or review of their contractor usage? So what does it mean to be subcontracting management? It is really the act of managing any non-employee resources that you are needed in open air to help deliver your project. And so there's a lot of components that we've seen over the years and that we see today from customers. How do we track varying costs by resource skill or skill set? We've seen where some customers, subcontractors will say, if I'm doing this rate, if I'm doing this, I'm charging this rate. And if I do this, I'm charging you this rate. Well, how do you manage what is that? And how do you manage keeping them available for skill searching if they're not actually active in your environment? So we'll go through that as well. And then how do we manage availability? That's one of the key items of knowing when your contractors are available. And what is the impact on open air licensing too? As you all know, there's different licensing components in open air, and what is the impact with your subcontractors? And then, assuming you have subcontractors in your open air account, how do we limit what they can see and do? It's important to make sure that we keep an eye on limitation of their ability to see key data within our environment. So we've seen two basic approaches with access for subcontractors. Most of the time we see customers just granting a subcontractor access just like they would any other user. So they will generally burn a time and material license in open air. They would log in, they enter time, they can be scheduled, and they basically behave the same way you would an employee or another T&M user within your staff. Occasionally we see where it's really, we're not hiring a single person to do a job. We're hiring a vendor to provide us the specialty that we need for our projects. And it could be a number of individuals, and we don't necessarily need to know exactly who did what when. But we'd also, let's say there's 5 or 10 resources that could be provided. You don't want to pay for 5 to 10 licenses if you don't have to. And in those scenarios, what we've seen is where you could create single vendor account user. So let's say Acme Staffing provides me resources. I create an account for Acme Staffing. Their job is to go in at the end of the week and enter time against what their resources. And you can put the name of the resource in the notes and the description, so you can kind of keep track of who entered what time. And then that allows us to build the time and account for the time and other things. So that's another approach. You could combine the two approaches. You don't have to go one or the other. We've seen where some dedicated subcontractors are set up as users, and some general vendor accounts are set up as general vendor users. So it does give you the ability to be flexible within your environment, and you just understand what is the vendor model for each vendor you're working with. Are they part of the team? Are you getting a team, or are you working with an individual? And that will kind of help you decide what the best option is. So how do we report and identify in our user accounts who's a vendor or subcontractor versus an employee? We've done custom fields where you just create a custom field, call employment type. You could have employee, contractor. The downside of a custom field is it's static. So you don't have when did they become a contractor, when did they end, or if they ever convert a contractor to an employee or vice versa, you actually generally would have to create a new user to accommodate that, because you lose that history of when they were a contractor versus when they became an employee. A better way to do this is using entity tags. Entity tags have been around a while now, and this is one of the real benefits of using entity tags, is the ability to tag employment type. And this really helps in being able to have dates. So between these dates, I was a contractor, and effective this date, I'm an employee. This helps with utilization reporting, being able to include, exclude before start dates, after end dates, exclusions, as well as movements if you change the type of user you are. And it also allows you to continue with the same user record, but be able to swap between different types of users. And so entity tags are pretty reportable throughout the system. You can filter most of your summary reports, as well as you can use them in search criteria, which we'll cover in a future slide. A lot of customers get nervous when they start bringing in subcontractors and into OpenAir. We want to make sure that we are well thought out as to what level of permissions that we're going to provide them. Often we'll recommend a contractor role, which is specific to just contractors, which has very limited permissions. They can't really change anything or access anything. And that's a combination of the role and then obviously the filter set. You want to make sure the filter set is very limited to where they can't see other users, or they can only see themselves if they run any reports that you've shared with them. And that's pretty standard functionality that most customers are good with. You can also make sure, if you are giving your contractors access to any sort of objects, that you can use form permissions to make sure. And when you have the role of a contractor, you can have a separate set of form permissions for contractors, so you can hide or read only different levels of data as well. And then obviously we do want to limit the ability for them to create or edit reports. And again, that's generally at the role level, which might be something different than you do at the standard time and material user. One thing to be cautious of, a while back, OpenAir added the ability to auto add users to your assignment groups. So generally what we see is an all employee assignment group, which is really helpful. As you add new users, they automatically get assigned, which means they inherit access to all your internal projects, your time off projects, and admin projects. However, be cognizant when you add a contractor, they will also be automatically added to those assignment groups. So you'll want to remove them from those, assuming you do not want them to have access to the same internal projects that your employees see. So be careful there. I've seen customers not realize that the contractors are seeing more projects than they should. And that assignment group automatic setting is actually set on the assignment group in OpenAir. So if you're not benefiting from that today, if that makes sense, you can just set the box on the assignment group, which will then put that feature in play. We're seeing a lot of customers embracing skill profiles using for both searches and availability. Subcontractors are a good use case for skill profiles. You can have a skill profile on a subcontractor, same as you would a normal employee. And you can use search. You can also create subcontractor records as generic users. And if you have a set of contractors you just want to be able to track to see who has what skill, a generic user is a good way to go. The good news is generic users don't cost you anything, and they have the same functionality as standard users when it comes to managing skill profiles. And that could allow you to be able to do some searching and for that. You can also search by hourly cost now. There's in the advanced resource search, which came out a couple of years ago, they added the ability to search by cost. So if you're ever looking to, if you've got standard costs throughout your system, looking to search not only skill, but also maybe by the cost of the resource, this is another option for contractors as well as employees. The other good news is when you're doing skill searches, you can search both inactive users as well as generic users. So, and And you can use entity tags. So remember, we've talked about entity tags being a good way to tag the types of users, types of employees in your system. Well, those are available in search criteria as well. So you could search specifically for employees or specifically for contractors. And then if your contractors are not active in your system, they can still be included in the search criteria as well as generics. So you still get them in your output of your criteria, and then from there you can decide if they're a good fit and are they available and can we bring them in. Cost management with contractors can get tricky. It can be very simple as well, but we've seen a lot of different ways that you've got your project profitability reporting that you're trying to get, your time and material employees, if they have their user costs populated, you can get the user costs. Your non-employee costs, we've seen captured a number of different ways. You could certainly use expense reports as a cost entry for subcontractors. We've seen that. You could use the purchasing module to be able to track vendor bills. And if you are using NetSuite and OpenAir together, that's a very popular, being able to create vendor bills in NetSuite and bring those into OpenAir, and then be able to assign that cost to the resource. And we see this a lot where it's more fixed cost. We're outsourcing something to a vendor that's going to perform the work. They're going to charge us X amount of dollars, and then that, or equipment or hardware or something tangible like that. Purchase items can be a really good place for that. And it allows you to rebuild them as well as review the costs. We're going to focus on time entry because if your subcontractors are entering time directly, you also want to make sure that you're capturing the costs coming in from your contractor, which could be a little tricky. So we're going to take a little bit deeper look at that. None of these are, you can use any or all or none of these options. They're not mutually exclusive in any way. You just need to be able to, when you're building reports for profitability, you need to be aware of what costs you're pulling into the report, where they're coming from, and make sure you're not double counting anybody's costs. If people are putting time and they're coming in through a vendor PO, for example, well, you want to make sure that you're not double counting their cost. So important to know where the costs should be coming from. Generally, we want to limit access from a subcontractor entering, so they should only see the projects, much like an employee, but unlike an employee, they're only going to see client projects that we've assigned them to or booked them to. So very limited. A lot of times contractors may come in and out. They're not consistent 40-hour-a-week people. And you may want to, you may have a timesheet alerts scheduled to go out on Monday or Friday to make sure people are reminded. And you may want to include or exclude contractors from that because, they may get a timesheet alert saying your time is missing when they actually didn't do work that week. So that may be something to think about. And there's a couple of tricks to be able to include or exclude them. There's also a way to be able to do time entry reconcile when you get a vendor invoice. And this allows you to be able to go in and say, okay, here's my vendor invoice. Here's the time entries. How do I reconcile the two? And so we'll walk through that as well. So if you're looking at timesheet alerts, decide, which vendors, or if any of the vendors do you want to receive these alerts? If you want to exclude them, there's only a few options for excluding. One of the ways we've seen that can be helpful is if you dedicate a department to subcontractors. That allows you to exclude that subcontractor department from the timesheet alerts so they don't get alerts. So this can be useful for being able to report on subcontractors, but also remove them from any automatic timesheet alerts. When you're tracking costs, there's obviously OpenAir gives you lots of flexibility on cost tracking. Generally out of the box, you'll have a single cost on a user, which may work for everyone. If your contractor has a cost and it's consistent and it's not project specific or even task specific.
You can obviously, there are three cost options that you may purpose for different reporting. But a lot of times we see where, a contractor may have a standard cost, but their cost may change at a project level or at a task level. And you need to account for that in your reporting. Otherwise, you've got incorrect project profitability reports. So enabling the ability for cost override at a project level or even down to a task level allows you to set those costs, subcontractor specific, down to that level. And so when OpenAir is calculating what the current cost is, it'll look to the task. If there's a cost, it'll use it. If there's not, it goes to the project. If there's a cost, it uses it. If not, it will default to the user cost. So you don't have to populate it. You only have to populate it if it's different than the standard cost that vendor is providing you. So this could be really helpful for getting really accurate reporting. Reconciling vendor invoices. This is a really slick and one of my favorite features. Pardon the old school OpenAir UI picks here. But basically, this is kind of one of those features if you're not using, there's a lot of use cases and a lot of good stuff in here. It allows you to basically go into timesheets, time entries, and filter on different users or subcontractors, and then be able to identify the time they entered for a period and be able to mark those times as invoiced or not invoiced. You can determine what kind of what kind of tags you want to create. But it allows you to be able to say, okay, I've got this invoice. Here's the time that this invoice covers. And then I tick, tick, tick. And then I can see what invoices were not, what time was not picked up by that invoice. And if it's in the current month, I can now run a report of any time that was not invoiced that I want to accrue in my financial system, maybe. So there's a lot of flexibility here. A lot of times we recommend to customers that just pay based, don't worry for an invoice from your vendor. Go into OpenAir, see what time has been entered. After it's been approved by your project managers, and then identify the time that's been entered. And then you basically create a payable in your financial system for that amount for that vendor. And that basically keeps you from having to do the reconcile, but you're still using this feature. So I can go into this month, I can run a report or run a list view, see what time's been entered by which. I mark them as paid. I can put notes in, this is for March. And if they're late on their time and they come back the next day and enter time, it'll get picked up on the next payroll. So another really nice way this feature can be very beneficial. Some of the reports we've seen that we want to make accessible to your contractors. You can build these reports and share them. They can run these reports from their dashboards. Is scheduling. If you're using OpenAir bookings for scheduling your resources and you're using that for subcontractors, that's a report or a dashboard you would push out that allow them to see. They would only see their own information generally, or if they are among a group of resources by a particular vendor. And then obviously time, you can give them the ability to report on time and as well. And only, again, limited to only what they can see. As you are thinking through what kind of reports you're looking to do to make sure that you are managing your subcontractors, obviously managing their scheduling, their bookings, timesheet compliance, the reconciliation feature, and then their cost are all good reports to be able to include for your visibility as you're monitoring your subcontractor usage. A couple of key KPIs we see is, what kind of plan versus actual time or cost have we spent. This would include both employees as well as your vendors. Vendor skill set leverage profile for being able to staff your vendors with the same skill sets your employees might be using. You also may want to look at your revenue ratio. What are we doing? Kind of revenue are we generating from our employee base versus our contractor base?
You can also do that by margin. What kind of margin are we generating from our employee base versus our contractor base? So all good information to kind of tell a story. Is, are you top heavy with employees, top heavy with contractors? Is there a better mix of the two in your that you're capable of achieving? And then obviously forecasting, what are employees' planned hours, forecasted dollars versus our subcontractor forecasted. So those are all key KPIs that we recommend paying attention to if subcontractors are part of your everyday project execution. So in summary, subcontractors for a lot of professional service organizations are not going to go away. They provide skill sets either you don't have in-house, or augmenting your existing skills, or just adding skills that you are not capable of hiring. They're a key part of the success of a project. Cost management, you need to think through your cost management goals, and what are you looking to do, and how do you want to do and manage that with visibility. What kind of monitoring do you want to do in your subcontractor usage is key. And then, if you are using the skill profiles and you're looking to build your skill profile, skill pool out, you can use that through the with a subcontractor as well. And then obviously, if you have an OpenAir administrator, or you are an OpenAir administrator, as vendors are being added, pay attention to the setup. There may be different setup for new vendors versus new employees in OpenAir. And so make sure that you have a well-documented process for onboarding new contractors. Again, thank you for joining today. Appreciate your ongoing loyalty to TopStep as we continue to be the primary vendor for supporting everyone in the OpenAir world.